If you missed the last program, it's ready for you now on planetaudio.org.nz. planetaudio.org.nz.
Hello, my name is Simon. Welcome to Why Is That, a free speech platform where we explore big ideas and the controversies of our time. Hello, beloveds, and welcome back to another episode of Why Is That? Integrity is so rare these days. Why is that? Today we're continuing our American election coverage because it just offers so many things of good social commentary. We'll be looking at the Project Veritas Undercover, hidden camera videos. This week will be the second solo show I've done, because basically I wanted to rant on and on about this topic. If you haven't heard about the Project Veritas Undercover videos, I suggest you go to YouTube and type in Project Veritas Action and find the videos called Rigging the Election 1, the Clinton campaign and the DNC incite violence at Trump rallies, and the second one called Rigging the Election 2, mass voter fraud. Both of these, the mainstream media, have only now grudgingly covered, and even then receiving pitiful, small coverage, to the point you could say there's been a media blackout. Now, of course, these are not favourable to the Democratic Party nor its candidate, Hillary Clinton. But of course, there is absolutely no media bias. Not at all, besides, the blackout of this story, and which, of course, has nothing to do with 96% of American reporters have donated to the Democratic Party. And media organizations have given to both candidates. It's just Hillary's got 27 times more than Trump got from media organizations. But of course, there's no evidence whatsoever of media bias. As we've covered before on the show, only about 6% of the American public trust the media. Interestingly, the Washington Post, the famous publication, took the unusual position of writing an article saying, "Dear readers, please stop calling us the media. There is no such thing." That's not an effective dodge for such a thing. And, of course, as a New Zealand radio show, I remind our New Zealand listeners that basically we get all the mainstream media here just pretty much gets coverage from organizations like CNN, also referred to in some circles as the Clinton News Network. So if they have no journalistic integrity and the New Zealand media is just repeating what they're saying and playing their clips, well, you can't really say the New Zealand media has too much credibility. Although even New Zealand content, I wouldn't say it has too much credibility. But that's another story. But this is an interesting case study in just bias and where we're at, I'd say, as a society, sort of in both the sense of Western civilization and the Anglosphere, etc., that such bias coverage can occur. I mean, if you look at the Trump tapes and allegations of women that come forward, most of which have been discredited, well, in fact, all of them, they're still 2 weeks later talking about that in the mainstream media. The WikiLeaks saga, Project Veritas videos, not covered. That's not balanced reporting. In fact, not covering something so vital, which I'll get into now to try to explain, in case you haven't come across it. Interestingly, somebody probably didn't get the memo at the New Zealand Herald, so when that came out, they actually covered it. But I'm as shocked as you are. But okay, the first video, which is to do with the incitement of violence, there was this huge narrative in the American mainstream media about how violent Trump supporters were, pretty much how they were rednecks and that sort of thing, allegations of racism, etc. But in the first Project Veritas video, which has 577,000 views, so you can say it went viral. Of course, that doesn't cover when it's embedded in a website, etc. That doesn't show up the views. But the first video shows top-ranking Democratic activists, and by activists we mean having political consultancy companies, etc., admitting to inciting violence at Trump rallies, including taking credit for a number of high-profile cases in the media. For example, you had a Trump rally in Chicago was cancelled after violent protests outside that left a number of people injured, including 2 police officers. There's a picture of one of them who's just got blood pouring down his face. Another one in Nevada, I think it was, where protesters took to the highway, shutting down the highways, ending that being cancelled. And of course, a lot of money goes into these rallies and services, etc. So, a lot of money is lost, of course, with the violence. People were hurt. Government resources, in terms of police, etc., tied up. There's clear criminality that happens in it. There was another case that made the news of a elderly woman who was on an oxygen tank, claiming to have been assaulted at a Trump rally. That a Trump supporter just basically punched her out of nowhere, which it turns out she was one of their activists. And when they're talking about some of their activists, they're not talking about people that can be directly tied to the Democratic establishment, where a conspiracy could be proven. We're talking about one of the Democratic campaigners talking about paying off crazy homeless people, basically putting them up in hotels, giving them a couple of weeks of training to go to Trump rallies and cause a ruckus. He also outlines bringing up union bosses and said, I need a guy to do this, this, and this, and this, mentioning that union people are rock and roll and they will pretty much do anything for the cause. I'm not saying that two are linked, but I do recall at Trump rallies people protesting outside, and at one of them they had people firing guns into the air. Now, of course, that's not peaceful protest. In fact, they're not, I wouldn't really describe those as protesters. I mean, this is a criminal action. It's violent. It's intended to intimidate. And the suggestions, a lot of these protesters, who might have been plants, were meant to also be pretending not just to be grassroots people, but also Bernie Sanders supporters. If you recall, after Donald Trump got the Republican nomination, the narrative began to change about how violent and unpredictable Bernie Sanders supporters were. All the while Hillary Clinton denounced the violence about Trump and Bernie Sanders supporters, where it turns out the violent people would have been her own operatives. Now, these operatives were trained apparently to provoke responses and get people's faces and identify people who are most likely to go off. So obviously it's the people who went off, they share some responsibility because they should have controlled themselves, but ultimately they were provoked. I mean, that's the big thing. Otherwise, it would have just been a peaceful rally. But as there was violence, it was used by the mainstream media to attack Trump. Now, of course, this is very dirty politics. Interestingly, one of the people on the tapes, Scott Fulver, has an interesting quote. He says to the person, of course he thinks is friendly, I'm of the old school. It doesn't matter what the frickin' legal and ethics people say. We need to win this motherfucker. Now, of course, he's also in a big part of the second video where they're talking about busing people in from outside the electoral area to help swing the vote. Now, there's a quote from him when he's talking about Republicans have been accusing them of busing people in. And the quote is, you know what? We've been busing people in to deal with you fucking assholes for 50 years, and we're not going to stop now. Now, also in the video, he talks about how he grew up with that happening. He has long-standing ties to the Democratic Party. Now, dear old Scott lost his job the day after the video came out. He was fired, I believe. And he mentioned being mentored by somebody else in the videos called Bob Creamer, who Scott Fulver referred to as diabolical and that he loved him for that. Now, these people are not no one, especially Bob Creamer, who's married to a Democratic congresswoman, and through 7 years of the Obama administration had visited the White House over 340 times, including numerous meetings with President Obama. In the recent Podesta email leaks, and now if you recall last week we covered the Podesta email leaks, but of course there are more coming. They do it in multiple dumps. Basically reference to coordinating with Bob Creamer was mentioned throughout the emails. Not heavily, but of course they're in there. We're talking about thousands of emails that are put out. So this guy, he was also done for fraud, it turns out. So not only committing fraud and other criminal actions in terms of the election, but he's married to a congresswoman, visited the White House, White House officials, deep ties to the Democratic National Convention, which, as we know from from WikiLeaks, rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders for Hillary Clinton. And of course, that didn't stop her run for the president, nor did the email scandal. It's quite interesting on that. You had FBI Director James Comey. I've actually sat down and watched a number of political hearings with members of Congress, I think it was, or the Senate. And he's gone through, the FBI has gone through hours and hours of grilling, and a lot of the politicians are not happy about what happened, not just out of partisanship. It's just there is clear corruption that's going on. I think I mentioned last week people were given immunity deals just for simply handing over information that could have been subpoenaed. So usually immunity deals are given over for future prosecution, so those people would testify. But no, it just seems like a cover-up. In fact, some sources within the FBI have said that James Comey didn't want to be the one responsible for scuttling the first woman candidate to run for president. I think we've all had that experience of having somebody, I'd say, lie to your face. You know, when somebody is telling you something that just doesn't add up, but, they haven't admitted any guilt and strongly protesting their innocence. Probably protesting too much. Not to get too off track, let's get back to the second Project Veritas video, which is, again, I strongly recommend you go to look up online. Go to Project Veritas Action. There's the channel on YouTube, and both episodes 1 and 2 are called Rigging the Election. Now, of course, there are other videos, and apparently more to come, but these two are particularly of note. And as mentioned before in the title, the second one is rigging the election to do with voter fraud. Now, you've got the case in the US where the Democrats have resisted attempts of having voter ID and attempts to change the system to help purge dead people who are on the rolls. Now, why would you fight that? There's an argument they put forward that, it's massively inconvenient and it disadvantages especially the minorities that usually vote for the Democratic Party. Not that they're not able, but, it's just too hard for them. Which, well, frankly, it's a little racist, don't you think? That's not quite the bigotry of low expectations. That's just like, oh, well, we don't think they can, do a simple task like go and wait in line, fill in some paperwork to get an ID. Of course, people have the freedom of travel, but we still have passports, don't we? And in some places, like New York, I believe, they issue voter IDs, but it's illegal to ask for them. So not only do they go through a phenomenal cost of issuing the IDs and having people, but you can't ask for them. They're pretty much useless. I mean, that doesn't add up. I think I've alluded to bits in the second one where they're talking about busing people in. The Scott Fovo character, who's quite interesting, he is talking about how he used to be an investigator, and when he does something illegal or dodgy, he's talking about, can conspiracy be proven? So he says he works backwards. Okay, now if I was trying to prove a conspiracy, how would I do it? And so I could avoid getting charged. Like he's saying with busing people in, if you can prove there's a bus, you can prove there's a conspiracy. But if you have a number of people come in by car, you chuck 5 in a car or whatever, now they've got to have the license plates for that state. So, obviously, well, there are all these cars outside with, from the next American state over. Now, if you're wondering why I'm not playing clips from the videos, I would love to do that, but I've had to delay a lot of my technical training for the radio show. The last 4 months of my life have been crazy busy, especially recently. Although there was also the beautiful foreign women, so, good times. Now, where were we? Oh, I got distracted by beautiful foreign women again. Oh, the second video, right. When he's talking about busing people in, and they've been doing it for 50 years, you wonder how many elections have been swayed. But I'd like to direct you to another YouTube video by Black Pigeon Speaks. Just go into YouTube and type that in. He does very good high-quality videos called Official Court Outlining Democratic Voter Fraud Playbook. Again, Official Court Outlining Democratic Voter Fraud Playbook. And not just any official, but the commissioner for the New York elections office. So he was, I think that might have actually been another Project Veritas video, but it was a very good commentary for the Black Pigeon Speaks one, where basically the topic of people being bussed around is brought up by certain communities. But he didn't want to, he said, I don't want to say, and the reporter was like, oh, you mean like black and Hispanics? And he's like, yeah, and the Chinese too. So just to boost the Democrat vote. And he's like, well, no, each of the communities have people running as well. So, you know, the nepotism and he said he didn't agree with it himself. He was a Democrat. He said he took his vote seriously, and, you know, it shouldn't be basically undone because you bus people one polling station and then to another polling station and another polling station, and you can't ask for ID. It's illegal. This is one of the areas. I think I was mentioned this before. And, of course, when it came out, people said he was being racist and he didn't know what he was talking about. Now, this is somebody, he is the elections commissioner. He knows what he's talking about. He's had a lot of experience on the ground. He's talking about absentee ballots that come in. He doesn't know where they come from, thousands of them. I mean, I'm sure he did the best job as he could. He seemed to have quite a lot of integrity, you know, talking about taking votes seriously, but you can only do so much. There was also another thing captured in a Project Veritas video where you had people ripping up absentee ballots for Republicans. They said they didn't send those ones out. So basically, you know, this is how elections are rigged. Now, I'm not saying that the Republicans are perfect angels, and I would say in certain places they've, gerrymandered the election boundaries. For example, in Texas is quite a Republican state, except for the area of Austin, which is known to be quite Democrat. And they've, you know, the election boundaries, they're just the most contorted things to try to get Republicans in. The Republicans have mainly done this by laws, although the Democrats, I don't know, there's just something on the left about on-the-ground action and activism. And what I sort of, to further explain, I've written about this, I've seen things, you know, other people talk about it. Come election time, it is the non-left-wing billboards that are, by vast majority, are the ones that are vandalized. And I think this is touching on a social commentary issue. When, especially coming out of America, but it's also being exported to New Zealand, just the people who oppose us are just bad people. I mean, you know, they're racists. They're, you know, just like the Nazis, pretty much. Now, of course, when the election's said and done and we have to sit down and work with each other, you know, how do you explain sitting down and working with the Nazis? You know, it's just very polarizing. So when there are all these billboards around the place, and that comes out of left-wing progressive politics, not so much the classical liberal left. Oh, old Labour, how we miss thee. So this is why we see at election time billboards with the Prime Minister's faces on them, defaced with swastikas on them, which is kind of ironic because, you know, the Prime Minister is Jewish, so, you know. I'll probably do a show about how the Nazis are actually socialist and left-wing, but that's something for another time. Just to wrap the show up on the tail end, tied in with last week, I mean, these hidden camera videos and, you know, the email leaks from WikiLeaks just haven't been getting any traction in the mainstream media. This is why only 6% of Americans claim to trust the mainstream media, and that was before the election and all this stuff comes out. A number of commentators have said, you know, the mainstream media is just torching the last credibility it had to try to get Hillary in, because if Trump gets in, that will probably be the decline of the mainstream media, which, well, actually I'd like to see. But this has also given rise to the alternate media. If you notice in the show, I refer people onto YouTube videos for further information, and basically we've seen the rise of the alternate media. Oh, what I forgot to mention was the Bob Creamer guy, who's married to the congresswoman, had visited the White House hundreds of times. He was asked, did Hillary know this? And he's like, well, basically through the chain of command, yes, she does. Because there was also the matter of they were acting as a in-between of the Hillary campaign and the super PACs, which by federal law they're not allowed to coordinate. So that's also potentially a federal crime. But for what coverage it has gotten, it doesn't seem the media cares. There was a reporter that asked Hillary Clinton on her plane, where she also flies around reporters, about the matter, and then she seems to have immediately stopped the press conference and walked off. Others had disputed the integrity of how it's been edited and what it actually portrays. It was funny, CNN got caught in a lot of its coverage. There was a individual in one of the first and second videos, I think. He was definitely in the first, called Aaron Black, who said he was pretty much the field general on the ground coordinating a lot of this stuff. And when CNN was giving coverage of the tapes, they had Aaron Black caught leading one of them, although in the CNN coverage he was strangely edited out. And you also had slogans for the billboards that were discussed in the Podesta leaks, and talking with Senator Bob Creamer were used at the very same rally, showing a link from the Hillary campaign to Bob Creamer to Scott Fover to Aaron Black on the ground, the lines of communication. Now, America does have the potential of going full-on banana republic if these things are allowed just to slide by. And if America goes that way, the rest of the Anglosphere might go that way. Now, if you look at the Western English-speaking world, we don't produce tyrants. We don't have the same problems with dictators as in other cultures. But of course, in recent decades, the culture in the Anglosphere has been eroded. As Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. So if we let this go on culturally, then our politics are screwed. So I think I'll leave it there. The next couple of shows will be, of course, still be on the American election. There's so much cultural commentary to do. And let's face it, it's kind of the greatest show on earth at the moment. I mean, very important for the future of Western civilization, this election. But also, it's so entertaining with the twists and turns, and we'll probably never see anything like this again. Especially if Hillary gets in and, grants amnesty to the millions of illegal immigrants in the US. So the Republicans will never get in again. So there will be a single-party state. So yes, we'll probably never see an election there. Well, not a free or fair one. So I will leave the show there, but please, please, please go to YouTube and look up Project Veritas Action. That's Veritas, Vertias. And look up the Rigging the Election videos. Also check out Black Pigeon Speaks. He's done a number of high-quality videos doing election coverage. And finally, on a personal note, I just recently given my 40th blood donation to the New Zealand Blood Service. If you're able, please consider doing the same. And be warned, if you're a universal donor like myself, every 3 months I'll be after you for a donation, because your blood is reserved for, is it the neonatal unit, the newborn babies? So yes, give blood, save lives, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye, beloveds. Join me, Simon and guests, 104.6 FM at 3:15 on Tuesdays for my show, Why Is That? or anytime online at planetaudio.org.